Dinner was finished, but Claire barely tasted it. Each spoonful felt distant, like she was moving on autopilot. Her thoughts stayed tangled in the words Michael had spoken. They circled her mind, stirring memories, unlocking emotions she had spent years keeping hidden. She wanted to push them away, but they clung to her like shadows. Michael finished his meal before she did, but he didn't leave the table. He sat quietly, watching her with a patience that unnerved her. It wasn't the restless energy of a teenager anymore. It was steady, mature, almost protective. Claire realized again that her son had grown into a man. And somehow, without her noticing, he had become strong enough to see what she had tried to hide. She set her spoon down, her appetite gone. The rain outside had slowed, leaving the world wrapped in silence. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking each second like a reminder that something important was happening. Even if no one else could see it, Michael leaned forward, breaking the silence. "Mom," he said carefully, "can you promise me something?" She looked at him, unsure. "That depends." "What kind of promise?" "That you won't give up on yourself," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "That you'll let yourself have more than just responsibility. That you'll give yourself a chance to be happy again." The words hit her harder than she expected. She tried to respond, but her throat tightened. She pressed her hands together in her lap, forcing herself to breathe evenly. He was only 19. Yet he had spoken the one thing she had avoided admitting even to herself, that she had given up on the idea of happiness long ago. Her eyes burned, and before she could stop herself, a tear slipped free. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed, but Michael's face softened. And he reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. His touch was warm, grounding. "Promise me," he whispered. Claire's voice broke when she finally spoke. "I don't know how." "Yes, you do," Michael said. "You've taught me my whole life to believe in myself, to keep going even when it's hard. You deserve to take your own advice." His words disarmed her. She had always seen herself as the one teaching him, guiding him, holding him steady. But now it felt reversed. He was the one showing her a truth she had been too afraid to face. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. Images flickered through her mind, her younger self laughing under summer skies, writing dreams in notebooks, daring to believe life was full of possibility. That girl felt so far away, but Michael's voice had reached her. It was as if he had opened a door she thought was locked forever. When she opened her eyes, she looked at him with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "I'll try," she whispered. Michael smiled softly, and it was the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I wanted to hear." The moment lingered, tender and fragile. Claire felt a shift inside her, as if the ground beneath her feet had moved slightly, urging her forward. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. They cleared the table together, working in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence from before. It was lighter now, filled with something unspoken but comforting. Claire washed the dishes while Michael dried, their movements falling into rhythm the way they always had when he was younger. But tonight, even this simple task felt different. As she placed the last dish in the rack, she found herself glancing at him, really seeing him not just as her son, but as a reminder of all the strength and love that had carried them this far. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder that there was still time for her own story to unfold. When the kitchen was clean, Michael turned to her, his expression gentle. "You're stronger than you think, Mom, but strength doesn't mean you have to be alone." Her chest tightened at those words. She nodded slowly, unable to speak, afraid her voice would break again. Later that night, after Michael had gone to his room, Claire sat by the window, staring out at the wet streets. The rain had stopped, and the air outside carried that fresh, clean scent that always came after a storm. She hugged her knees to her chest, letting her thoughts drift. 4 years. She had told herself her time had passed, that her life was no longer about her. She had buried her dreams beneath layers of duty, convincing herself it was noble, convincing herself it was enough. But Michael's words had cracked that belief wide open. "You're still a woman with dreams." Not just my mom. The sentence replayed in her mind, soft but insistent. It was both terrifying and freeing. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine possibilities. Not grand or dramatic, just simple moments she had almost forgotten she wanted. Laughter over coffee with someone who saw her. A walk under the autumn leaves with a hand holding hers. A smile meant only for her. The thought filled her with both fear and longing. Could she really open her heart again? Could she risk being vulnerable after so many years of protecting herself? She didn't know, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay locked in the life she had built around survival. Michael's words had shown her that. She leaned her head against the cool glass, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. Her tears had dried, but her heart felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It wasn't about chasing the past. It was about allowing herself to believe that her story wasn't finished, that somewhere beyond the walls she had built, there might still be space for love, for joy, for being seen again. And all of it began in the quiet of the kitchen, with her son's steady voice breaking the silence she had carried for too long. Claire closed her eyes, a small smile forming at the corners of her lips. For the first time in years, she felt a door had opened inside her, a door she thought would stay locked forever. And though she didn't know what waited on the other side, she was ready at last to step through. Her mind flashed back to her younger self, the girl who used to sketch designs in her notebook, who once wanted to travel, who believed in love so fiercely that she gave her heart away too quickly. That girl felt so far away now, buried under years of routines and disappointments. Michael's words had unearthed her, piece by piece, in a way she hadn't expected. She turned to face him, her voice breaking despite her effort to steady it. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because," he said simply, "I don't want to look back years from now and realize I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. You've given me everything, Mom. I just want you to remember that you deserve more than just surviving." Her breath caught. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft simmer of the pot and the rain tapping harder against the windows. She couldn't move, couldn't think. He had no idea how deeply his words struck her. Or maybe he did. Maybe that was why he had chosen them so carefully, so deliberately. At that exact moment, she sat down on one of the stools by the counter, her legs suddenly heavy. She pressed her palm against her forehead, trying to gather herself. "Michael, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything," he replied gently, moving to sit across from her. "Just let yourself think about it. Promise me you will." Claire lifted her eyes to him then, really seeing him not as the boy she raised, but as the man he was becoming. Strong, thoughtful, unafraid to speak the truth even when it hurt. And for the first time in years, she felt both the sting of being exposed and the strange comfort of being understood. She wanted to tell him that his words scared her, that they cracked open a loneliness she had tried to bury. But she also wanted to thank him, to hold him, to tell him how proud she was of the man sitting across from her. Instead, she whispered the only words she could manage. "You don't know how much it means to hear that." Michael's expression softened further, but his eyes stayed steady. "I think I do." The kitchen, once just a place of routine and dinner prep, had become something else entirely. A place where truths had finally been spoken. A place where silence no longer shielded her. Claire knew her life would not feel the same after that night. His words had shifted something inside her, something that had been waiting quietly for years to be woken up. And though she didn't yet know where it would lead, she knew one thing for certain: she could never go back to pretending. She hadn't heard him. The room felt heavier after Michael's words, though nothing around them had changed. The rain still whispered against the glass. The pot still bubbled quietly on the stove. Yet Claire felt as if she had stepped into another world, a world where her son had seen straight through her. She turned back to the stove, trying to keep her hands busy, but her chest ached. His words had shaken something loose inside her that she had buried for years. She stirred the soup, though it no longer needed stirring, her eyes blurring as old memories surfaced. Nights long ago when she had stayed awake in bed, waiting for a husband who came home too late, or not at all. Holidays spent smiling for Michael's sake while her own heart felt hollow. Years of holding everything together with quiet strength, telling herself it was enough. She thought she had closed the door on those feelings. She thought she had accepted that her life was what it was. But Michael's voice had unlocked the part of her that still longed for more. Mom. His voice broke the silence. He had noticed her hands trembling as she gripped the wooden spoon too tightly. She forced herself to smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. It's nothing. Just tired. But Michael didn't look convinced. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the counter, watching her with the same steady gaze that had unsettled her minutes before. You don't have to pretend with me. Not anymore. The words landed deep. Pretending, yes, that was what she had done for so long. Pretended she was fine. Pretended she didn't miss the warmth of companionship. Pretended that giving everything to her son filled all the spaces in her heart. She loved him more than life itself, but she was still human. Still a woman who wanted to be held, to be seen, to be loved. And that realization scared her. She placed the spoon down carefully and turned to face him. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. You make it sound so simple. Like I can just decide to want something for myself again. But it's not that easy. Michael tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe it's not easy. But it's possible. That's all I'm saying. She dropped her gaze to her hands, noticing the faint wrinkles forming around her knuckles, the proof of years slipping by. How long had it been since someone held those hands with tenderness? How long had it been since someone looked at her and saw more than the role she played? Too long. The ache in her chest grew heavier, but with it came a spark she hadn't felt in years. A reminder that she wasn't finished yet, that her story wasn't over. She wanted to speak, to tell him that she missed the laughter of her youth, the way her heart once raced at the promise of love. But she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. How could she admit that to her son? Instead, she swallowed hard, keeping the words locked inside. Michael must have sensed it, 'cause he spoke again, softer this time. I just want you to be happy. That's all. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care if it means starting over. I want you to know you're allowed to want more. His words twisted her heart. She blinked back tears, but one slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly brushed it away, embarrassed, but Michael noticed. He didn't say anything, though. He didn't tease, didn't press. He just stayed there, watching her with a quiet understanding that was somehow even harder to bear. The silence stretched again. But this time it was different. It wasn't empty, it was full of things neither of them dared to say. Claire turned off the stove and reached for the ladle. She served the soup into bowls, her movements steady though her thoughts were not. When she set one in front of him, their eyes met again. She saw so much in his gaze: care, respect, and something else she couldn't quite name. It was almost as if he were holding up a mirror, showing her the parts of herself she had ignored. They sat at the table together, steam rising from their bowls. Normally, dinner was filled with small talk about his classes or his friends. But tonight the air was thick with everything that had been said. And everything that hadn't. Claire lifted her spoon, but her appetite was gone. Her heart was too full, her mind too restless. She looked across at Michael, at the young man who was no longer just her son, but also her reminder of the life she had almost forgotten she wanted. The thought startled her. She pushed it away quickly, focusing on the soup, but the ache lingered. It wasn't about him. Not exactly. It was about what he represented: growth, change, the undeniable truth that life still had room for more than survival. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she finally said, "You've grown into someone I never imagined. Stronger, wiser. Sometimes it scares me." Michael gave her a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Don't be scared. I learned it from you." The words struck her harder than she expected. She looked down, letting the steam blur her vision. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she had given him more than just food and shelter, that she had taught him resilience, honesty, and heart. And if that was true, maybe she could still learn those things for herself again. Her chest tightened with the longing she couldn't name out loud. Not just for love, though that was part of it, but for freedom, for the chance to live again, to laugh without the weight of the past on her shoulders. And yet, all she could do was sit there, spoon in hand, pretending she was fine. Even as her son's words echoed inside her when she finally looked up, she found him still watching her, patient, as if he understood every thought she hadn't spoken. That look undid her more than anything, because in that moment she realized he truly saw her not just as his mother, not just as the person who raised him, but as a woman who still had a heart that could break. And maybe someday could heal. She wanted to thank him for that, to tell him how much his words mattered, but her throat tightened and all she managed was a small nod. Her eyes wet with the tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Michael didn't press. He didn't need to. The truth was already there, hanging between them in the quiet kitchen. And as Claire sat across from her son, her heart heavy yet strangely alive, she understood one thing. With piercing clarity, something inside her had been woken up. Something she could no longer silence, no matter how hard she tried. The longing was unspoken, but it was real. And it was only the beginning. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, a steady drizzle that wrapped the small suburban house in a soft gray hush. Claire stood in the kitchen, the glow of the overhead light catching the copper strands in her hair. She moved quickly, her knife tapping against the cutting board. Onions and carrots lined neatly in front of her. Cooking had always been her way of keeping the house warm, of making the quiet feel less lonely. She had not expected company in the kitchen. Most evenings, her 19-year-old son, Michael, was either shut away in his room with his guitar or out with friends. But tonight, she heard his footsteps on the hardwood, slow and deliberate. When he appeared in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, Claire almost dropped the knife. "Need some help?" he asked, casual but kind, leaning against the counter like he had all the time in the world. Claire hesitated. She was used to doing everything herself, not because she wanted to, but because life had taught her to rely only on her own two hands. Still, she pushed the knife toward him with a small smile. "If you're offering, you can start with the peppers." Michael took the knife without complaint, rolling up his sleeves. His movements weren't graceful, but there was effort in them, and that effort mattered. Claire watched from the corner of her eye, noting how carefully he cut each strip. His brow furrowed, as though the peppers were an exam he couldn't afford to fail. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence between them. It was a peaceful noise, steady, almost like a rhythm guiding their small dance in the kitchen. Claire stirred the pot on the stove, and for a fleeting moment it struck her how rare this was. Not the act of cooking together, but the stillness of it, the feeling that neither of them was in a hurry to be anywhere else. She remembered when Michael was small, no taller than her hip, always tugging at her shirt, always asking questions, always close. Back then, cooking had meant him climbing on a stool beside her, reaching for spoons he couldn't quite hold, spilling flour on the floor, laughing when she scolded him lightly. Those memories had faded into the blur of years, replaced by his quiet independence, his closed door, his growing life that seemed to exist just beyond her reach. And yet here he was, standing shoulder to shoulder with her, as though time had folded in on itself. "You're getting good at that," she said, nodding at his careful slices. Michael smirked, not looking up. "Don't act so surprised. I've picked up a thing or two watching you all these years." The words were simple, but they warmed her. She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him how much it meant that he noticed, that he remembered, but her throat tightened, and she turned back to the stove instead. For a few minutes, they worked in silence, the only sounds the chop of the knife and the bubbling of the pot. But beneath that silence, Claire felt something building, something she couldn't quite name. It was as though the air between them had thickened, carrying a weight of things unsaid. Michael broke it first. "It's kind of nice, isn't it?" Claire glanced at him. "What is?" This, he said, gesturing around the kitchen. Just cooking together. No TV, no noise. Just us. Her chest tightened again, but this time it was with something softer, something close to gratitude. She nodded, keeping her eyes on the pot so he wouldn't see the shine in them. Yes, she whispered. It is. The moment stretched, fragile and full, like a glass ball balanced on a fingertip. Claire knew it could shatter with a single, careless word. And yet, she also knew that whatever Michael was about to say next would matter. He had that look in his eyes, the same look he'd had as a child when he was about to ask a question too big for his years. She busied herself with the spoon, stirring slowly, waiting. Michael set the knife down, wiped his hands on a towel, and leaned closer to the counter. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he studied her face, the lines around her mouth, the faint weariness in her eyes. His gaze was steady, serious, older than his 19 years. Claire felt her heart race under the weight of it. She tried to smile, to break the heaviness, but the smile wavered. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the air seemed to pause, even the rain outside softening as though it too was waiting. She told herself not to be nervous. After all, he was just her son. But there was something in his silence, in the way his lips pressed together, that made her bracing for words she wasn't ready to hear. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the salt. She sprinkled it into the pot, forcing her attention back to the bubbling broth. She didn't look at him. Couldn't. And then, just as she lifted the spoon, he spoke. "Mom," he said softly, "can I tell you something without you getting upset?" The spoon froze midair. Her heart stopped for a beat. She set it down carefully, turning to him. "Of course," she said, her voice steady, though her hands weren't. Michael hesitated, running his thumb along the edge of the counter, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite read. That was the moment Claire realized this night was not like any other. Something was about to be said that she would never forget. Something that would not only change how she saw him, but how she saw herself. She waited, breath caught in her chest, as her son opened his mouth to speak, and that was when his words began, words that would stop her in her tracks, words that would pierce deeper than anything she had heard in years. The kitchen felt smaller when Michael finally spoke, as if the walls had leaned in closer to hear him. His voice was quiet, careful, almost like he was afraid to disturb the fragile moment. "You know, Mom," he began, his eyes fixed on the cutting board, "you deserve more than you've had." Claire froze. The steam from the pot curled around her, but she hardly noticed. Her hands hovered above the counter, her mind stumbling over his words. She turned slightly, searching his face, but he didn't look up. He kept his gaze on the peppers, his knife pressing too hard, slicing unevenly now. "Michael," she said softly, "what do you mean by that?" He exhaled, his shoulders sinking as though he had been carrying the sentence for weeks. "I mean, I've been paying attention. Maybe you don't think I notice, but I do. You've spent your whole life taking care of me, making sure I had everything I needed. You gave up things you wanted just to make sure I had a chance. And I can't remember a time when anyone ever gave you the same in return." Claire's heart stumbled. For years, she had worked in silence, long hours at her job, late nights helping with homework, weekends filled with laundry and bills. She had smiled through the exhaustion, convinced it wasn't worth explaining. Michael was a child then, innocent. He didn't need to know about the sacrifices, the loneliness, the way her marriage had crumbled until there was nothing left but silence between two people. She had protected him from all of it. And yet, here he was, 19, and suddenly seeing her as if he had stepped behind a curtain she had carefully drawn. She cleared her throat, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "You don't have to worry about me. I'm fine." But her voice was too quick, too thin. And she knew it. Michael set the knife down, finally lifting his eyes to hers. His gaze was steady, sharper than she expected. "No, you're not. You've been fine for everyone else. For me, for work, for this house. But when was the last time you were fine for yourself?" Claire swallowed hard. The question lodged in her chest. She wanted to answer, to brush it off with a joke, to redirect the conversation. But the truth hung heavy inside her. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt seen, not as a mother, not as an employee, not as someone filling a role, but as a woman with her own heart. She turned away, pretending to stir the pot again, but her hand trembled around the spoon. Michael, you don't understand. Life isn't about always getting what you want. Sometimes it's about doing what you have to. I get that, he said quickly, stepping closer. His voice wasn't harsh, it was urgent. But you've been doing what you have to for so long. You've forgotten what it feels like to want something for yourself. And I hate seeing that. Claire blinked, the tears threatening now. She bit her lip, refusing to let them fall. He wasn't supposed to see her this way. She was supposed to be the strong one, the steady one, the parent who carried everything so he wouldn't have to. But his words had cut through years of silence, and she couldn't stop them from reaching her. You sound so grown, she whispered, half in disbelief, half in sorrow. Michael's lips curved into a small, almost sad smile. I guess I had to grow up faster than you thought. There it was, the shift she had been sensing. He wasn't the boy who once clung to her hand in the grocery store. He wasn't the teenager slamming his door after arguments about curfews. He was standing in front of her as a man, steady and unflinching. Daring to say what no one else had ever said to her, he leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and his voice softened. I just don't want you to forget who you are. You're not only my mom. You're a person with dreams, with feelings. And you still have time? Don't let the past take that away from you. The spoon clattered against the pot as she set it down, her hands unsteady. She gripped the edge of the counter, grounding herself. She wanted to argue, to tell him that he didn't understand the weight of responsibilities, the years she had carried alone. But deep inside, she knew he was right.